I'm on a mission like a couple spies, and that, guys, is the reason why I catechize.
Welcome to the Reformed Standard. I'm Tony. Let's get started. Question 16 of the Westminster Larger Catechism reads, how did God create angels? Answer, God created all the angels, spirits, immortal, holy, excelling in knowledge, mighty in power, to execute his commandments and to praise his name, yet subject to change. Now, I'll have to admit, the first time that I read through the Westminster Larger Catechism, I was a little bit taken aback by the fact that this question even exists. And before we dive into it, I think it bears noting that this is just one more incident where the divines are being careful, right? The Bible talks about angels, and it gives us information about their nature and about their purpose. And so the divines are careful to include that in the context here of their body of teaching. Also, there's an overemphasis on angels in a lot of traditions in our day, but in the day of the Reformers and in the day of the Westminster Divines, the medieval church had kind of taken angelology and driven it to like number 11. So it was a major teaching and a major thing that was turning kind of a folk religion. People were worshiping the saints. They were also worshiping angels. So this question here serves to clarify the teaching of the scriptures that was being distorted by sort of the folk religion of the day, and also by the formal religion of Roman Catholicism. And so it breaks it up into various attributes. We'll go through each of them briefly. And we talked about some of these when we talked about God in the question 7 of what is God. And it says God created the angels spirits. So angels do not have physical bodies. They are spirits, which has a whole range of meanings. But they are not constrained to physical reality the way that we are. But it's also not true to say that they're omnipresent like God is. So angels are creatures. He created them spirits, but he did not create them divine. So there's teaching out there that would call angels divine. A man by the name of Michael Heiser wants to say that God consulted them during creation, that were created in the image of the angels, all sorts of sort of crazy things. He created them immortal. I was just reading in Voss the other day that the concept of immortality has a lot of different connotations, but immortal here doesn't mean indestructible. It doesn't mean inherently immortal. It simply means that God created the angels with no principle of death in them. So there was never a point where the angels would have ceased to exist. But that doesn't mean that they're self-sustaining. It's still God who sustains their being in essence. He created them holy, which could have a couple different meanings. It could mean that he created them with a particular purpose. In that way, they're set apart for a task, which we'll get to in a little bit. But more likely, it refers to their purity. He created angels initially with no mixture of corruption. They were created pure, they were created holy, they were created righteous. Now, this is one thing that we don't think about very often, that they were excelling in knowledge. Now, we could dive in a little bit to what that means, but more or less, I think what the divines are getting at here is that just like we'll see with man, they were created with intimate knowledge of who God is. So it's probably not accurate to say that they had the entire content of special revelation, but they were created in a way where they knew who God was, they knew who they were, and they knew what was expected of them. And they're mighty in power. What we'll see when we get to question 17 is that these two questions serve as sort of foils for each other. So we see question 17 is talking about the creation of man. Angels are created mighty in power in relation to other creatures. So they have various abilities, various powers that we would call supernatural. We would look at them and say that they're stronger than us, they're smarter than us, they're faster than us. Kind of in every way, except for one particular way, the angels are superior to us. Next, it says that they were created to execute his commandments. So angels were created as servants of God to accomplish various tasks, not because God needed to have someone to fulfill his tasks. We're not talking about Greek polytheism, where the gods create lesser creatures in order to accomplish things in the world that they don't want to sully their hands with. We're not talking about Gnosticism, where the one sort of distills himself or itself into sort of more creaturely forms in order to interact with creation. But God frequently chooses to act using means. So in Scripture, there's a variety of things that says that he does by angels. The book of Hebrews talks about how the law was given to Moses through the agency of angels. We see that when God wanted to rescue Lot from Sodom and Gomorrah, he sent angels to bring him out of the city. And they don't convince him to leave, but they physically drag him out of the city. And lastly, here we see that God created the angels to praise his name. So this is kind of a further extension of that last clause there. That angels, like man, were created to glorify God. But we cannot say in the same sense that they were created to enjoy God forever, because the enjoyment of God, as we talked about in the very first episode, is not about sort of a sense of self-satisfaction or pleasure, but it's about being saved and united to Christ in a way that angels just cannot be said to do. So there's a certain kind of mediatorial fellowship that God has with all of his creatures that are not separated from him as a result of sin. And so it's true to say that the angels have a fellowship with God, even in a more intimate sense than sometimes humans do. But we can't say that they enjoy God through union with Christ, because Christ did not come, as Hebrews says, Christ did not come to help angels, but he came to help the seed of the children of Abraham. And this is all capped off with a statement that although angels were created as spirits, immortal, holy, excelling in knowledge, mighty in power, to execute his commands and to praise his name, they are yet subject to change. And this is important because just as man fell, a portion of the angels also fell. And so we sometimes think about angels as kind of like a smaller version of God, or like a lesser version of God. But in reality, as different as they may be from us, they are infinitely different from God and infinitely more like us than they are like God. So it's important to remember that the concept of immutability, which is God's alone, is not extended to the angels. But instead, angels, although created holy and although created immortal, they're still creatures. They still experience time, right? There's no statement in this question or answer about them being atemporal or eternal or infinite or anything like that. They're excelling in knowledge, but they're not omniscient. They're mighty in power, but they're not omnipotent. So we have to understand that the angels are created beings, and just like us, they're subject to change. And as we'll see in question 17, it's slightly different than how humans are subject to change. But in some ways, the end result is the same. That they are creatures that worship God. They're creatures that are finite and dependent on God. And they're creatures that are subject to change.
Do you know, if you want, you could know this? The Catechism, hey, the Catechism, hey. Do you know what the chief and the man is? And how the Father, Son, and Spirit do manage? Do you know, if you want, you could know?
West Side.